Alright, so Brenda,
Yes, Hawken.
how did, in your opinion, World War I affect America's general mental outlook on life, society?
One really major way, which was that when overseas in 1917, women took their places in factories. Women appeared coming into the workforce in larger numbers than they ever had before. This was at the same time that women had been agitating to gain the right before World War I. The effect of World War I was that it was apparent to everyone that women more than held up their end of the job market during the war, doing all the jobs that men had done, and there was absolutely no reason to continue to deny them the vote. So finally, in 1919, the 19th Amendment was passed, and women were allowed to vote in state and federal elections, starting with the federal election of 1920.
So do you think that affected how everyone looked out towards how they should lead their own lives? Do you think that completely changed the lifestyle of...
The argument had always been that women shouldn't have to overtax their brains with something beyond husband and children and their homes, but they more than proved that they could do a great deal more than that by holding the jobs that men had held during the war, and there was no further reason to deny them the vote. The other major impact of World War I was that virtually as soon as it was over, America almost universally regretted participating in it at all. And this is being filmed, so don't come walking here. Stay over there. Americans regretted having been sucked into World War I. They figured they had been sucked in. Woodrow Wilson had led them into it, that they really didn't have any quarrel with Germany or the other nations of Europe that were at each other's throats, and a mood of isolationism became prevalent, that America should not involve itself in the affairs of Europe. The American Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, which would have established the League of Nations and the United States membership in it. The United States had to make a separate treaty with Germany after the Treaty of Versailles was defeated in the Senate, despite Woodrow Wilson's campaign for it. And the United States was never a member of the League of Nations, which was headquartered in Geneva. They were simply had observer status. And this mood of isolationism and turning inwards was part of the American national outlook until Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Because there was significant resistance even to helping Britain and France very briefly because they gave up so quickly as World War II began, but to help Britain in the battle against Russia 20 years later because of the isolationism that was still prevalent in the United States. The other thing, societally, the other thing that happened was when the war was over, suddenly there was an explosion of prosperity and good times. During a war, people are unable to get the kinds of consumer goods that they might have when there's not a war on. As after World War II, people were finally able to buy cars again, refrigerators, all of the factories had all been used to make war material, and the same had been true in World War I. So as soon as it was over, there was an explosion of musical, cinematic, books, clothes, people having as much fun as they possibly could. And that this carried on through the 20s until 1929, when the stock market crashed and everything became much more grim in America. But the flapper generation of the 1920s, hems came up, bustles went out the door, girdles went out the door. People had a good time. And this often happens after a war, this pent-up relief for having survived the war, for having the war over, for having access to consumer goods again. So that was probably the second major impact. But the most important one was the fact that women gained the right to vote. They proved themselves by holding the jobs of men during the war, and men felt they had no reason to deny them participation in American political life.
Right. And that's interesting because the idea of isolation also continues in the idea of modernism in the arts. in Tom Horton's class, and that idea of the isolation, all of a sudden the transition to freedom, which also led into the idea of like we're just going to throw away everything else that was behind us, and we're going to start something completely new and rebellious. And do you know anything about the like how that affected the arts in a way? Like,
I don't. I'm not a very artsy person.
That's fair.
I know that the New York Yankees were the team of the 20s, but that's probably not the arts.
Yeah.
But there was an explosion of interest in baseball, became truly the national pastime. Babe Ruth's heyday was in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
That was when he first began his career with the Red Sox and the New York Yankees. And baseball was the king of sports then, as the NFL seems to be today.
Yeah.
Well, but I don't know anything. The arts and I are not on close personal terms.
That's fair. That wasn't the main part of the question.
That's
anyway,
good.
So, yeah.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Brenda.